Okay, welcome everyone to our last micro seminar of the current academic year. I hope you've had a chance to participate in and hopefully view our last survey, which focused on digital accessibility. If you haven't seen it, please go to our website. It's right there at the banner. You just click on it and it's posted. Really informative seminar. I can't thank enough all those that have participated in this year's micro seminars, providing some really great information. You'll notice this format for this seminar is a little bit different. We decided for this particular seminar to run it in an open session forum to encourage really more interaction and discussion. So thank you for participating. Today's seminar will focus on the results of our annual A4EOE survey. For the last 20 years, the Alliance has had an opportunity to look at best practices around the globe and even closer to home. This particular survey looks at member institutions located primarily in southeastern Michigan. It's always good to know what is happening in your neck of the woods so we can work together to provide our faculty and students the best in an online learning experience. It's really nice to be able to share amongst each other best practices. So it's really great that we've been able to, through Dr. Sean Moore's efforts and Louisa's efforts, this particular survey results. Dr. Sean Moore is the Director of e-learning at Oakland University. He holds a bachelor's degree in English and French, a master's in English, and a PhD in educational leadership, all from Oakland University. But I'm not sure if you knew that in 2017, Dr. Moore was named one of Oakland County's executive elite 40 under 40 for all of his outstanding contributions to Oakland University and its community. I learned something new about Sean almost every day. So that's pretty exciting and amazing stuff. Our other presenter is Louisa Marine. She's the Director of Instructional Technology and Virtual Learning at Macomb Community College. And I believe she's also the Interim Dean of Learning Sources. She holds a bachelor's of science degree in elementary education and teaching math and language arts from Western Michigan, and a master's in curriculum and instruction, integrated technology from George Mason University. As I mentioned, we've got some really, really good team members that have supported all the learning that's gone on this year. And I can't thank Louisa and Sean enough for their great work for this particular seminar. So with that, I'd like to turn the reins over to Dr. Moore so he can lead us through the presentation. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you so much, Patrick. All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to minimize this so I'm not blocking too much of the screen here. And we'll kind of go back and forth with Louisa and myself as we go through this. So one of us should be trying to hopefully monitor the chat as we go through. But welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about these wonderful survey results that we got. Before I get started with this here, I will say that you can click on the chat and just introduce yourself if you'd like to. Tell us where you're from, what your role is, and we'll have some time here at the end to have a nice little discussion, hopefully. So as I said, or as Patrick already sort of introduced us, so I won't go into that part of this here. You can see mine and Louisa's name here, but we're going to talk about the institutional survey results. Just to kind of give you a better idea of the agenda that we're going through, we're going to talk about really briefly some national trends from the Chloe reports, of course, getting into the A4EOE survey. And we want to have some time at the end to talk about some current challenges and discussions that we'll have there. So we'll have like a nice discussion that we have here at the end. And of course, as always, if there's time allotted, Patrick and I will have our disco dance off, which we've never had yet. So we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to just dive right into this with national trends. And I will say this right now, this is both being recorded and we will give you access to these slides afterwards. So if we go through some of these really quickly, or you have some questions, we can always go back around. We want to try to get this data out to you and also have some time for discussion. So if some of these things I go through a little quick, we can always go back to it, but you will have access to the slides afterwards. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about the Chloe report, or the changing landscape of online education. You may have heard of this report before. It's a joint venture between Quality Matters and the EduVentures Research. They've done this for the past 6 years. Actually, they just did the seventh one. I got to participate in that. And they'll send it out to all what they call the chief online learning officers. And they had 361 responses this last time around. So I just want to briefly talk about some of these data that we have here. Like, for instance, This is, of course, no surprise when we look at the pandemic. More than 80% of the institutions relied on fully online or emergency remote learning. And so they sort of differentiated those two things, what we might recall from back in the spring and summer of 2020, where we were kind of thrown online and it wasn't maybe the traditional online. So they call it emergency remote learning. There was understandably some volatility in enrollment in fall 2020. And some of those were falling, and some of those we still see continue to fall. So we'll look a little at that. And they also saw a little bit of grade shifting, slightly lower grades in fall 2020. But they saw a substantial increase in both the required and optional online student orientations for that. So just a few different screens here that'll show about the long-term impact of the pandemic on undergraduate enrollment. And this is just what they thought when they're asking the chief online learning officers, what do they thought the impact will have on it. So I thought this was somewhat interesting to see, especially when you look at towards the bottom of this, where there's they believe there's going to be a strong increased online enrollment or some increased online enrollment. And you can see that's sort of where the majority sits, is even for the different schools. It doesn't matter if it's 2-year, 4-year, public, private. Most of them are believing there's going to be, because of this pandemic, there's going to be an increase in online enrollment. And we see a little bit in the survey that we'll talk about as well. The likelihood that undergraduates, this is emergency remote learning again, will evolve in online programs. This is, I thought, was interesting to share as well, because you see a pretty high majority of these are saying it's either very likely or likely for some subjects that they think that will evolve into some online learning programs. And I can even say just, for my own institution, when we're looking at different areas for online programs, we've had just an overwhelming amount that we're talking to now about thinking of going online that said, we never thought we can do it, but now because of the pandemic, we think we can. So anecdotally from OU, this is just, we can certainly see these data bearing out for us. And a likelihood of synchronous components. So when we think about online learning, it's interesting to think about like synchronous and asynchronous and what works best, because there's great reasons for both. And also there are some folks who really want the synchronous or the asynchronous version, because so they can have that flexibility, but asynchronous does work very well. So we saw some of this here, and I thought this was interesting to share, where we thought the likelihood if there's going to be synchronous components on there. And you can see that most of them think in some way it's going to have some synchronous components, some of their online courses. That's not to say there won't be asynchronous courses, but I think we're going to see a little bit more trend of that. Just a few final ones of these national ones. The impact on resources. So this is interesting to see, and I'm sure we can all talk a little bit about this with the discussion about how this might have impacted your area for the sort of online learning area. Did they get more resources? Did they have some taken away? You can see some of the unlucky ones on the left side of this chart had a substantial decrease or some reductions or no additional resources. And then other ones were a little bit more lucky, were given some resources or even substantial resources there. I know at OU, we had a tiny bit of resources that were given to help just with the overwhelming amount of support that we had to do. And this final one is just looking at the investment areas that were made during it. And you can see the biggest one that kind of stands out here, the tech, hardware, and software licenses. There was a lot that had to be done to move things online. We had a whole virtual computer lab and some of those licenses that we had to do move online at OU, I know. Some things that we're doing for scholarship, financial aid, exam and proctoring. We can have a whole talk about exam and proctoring and what folks think about that. But it's just sort of interesting to see where some of that money landed on this. So I just want to quickly set the scene with the national one before we get into our A4EOE survey for this year. It's actually been 3 years since we've done a survey because the last one was at the 2019. And so because of 2020 and 2021, we didn't have the symposium. So this is, we're finally back and giving you these survey results and data. So for those of you who did take, there's some of you on here that did take this survey, but if you don't know, we had 34 questions, 4 different sections in the survey. We sent it out to 16 of our member institutions and we got 9 of them that were able to respond back. So the data here, I'm going to turn this over to Louisa now, and we'll talk a little bit about the data that we found in our survey.
Thanks, Sean. So these are the 9 A4EOE institutions that participated. So even in our local area, we had a good representation of 2-year, 4-year, private, and public. So I think these results will be, very relevant to the discussions moving forward. So something that we looked at is how well were you able to adapt and leverage online learning? All 9 institutions reported a successful transition to online, though it may not have been easy, and as most of us experienced, it probably was easy in some areas and not others. Main difficulties were not having enough staff and having to transition a large number of courses. So 3 schools reported an easy transition, 3 reported a quick one, 2 reported a stressful transition, and 1 reported a difficult transition. So I'm sure you're all identifying with one of those. The next thing we looked at were what changes these schools experienced related to the interest in online learning. And all 9 institutions saw some change in online learning due to the pandemic, and the majority of those results were favorable. So 6 saw more acceptance for online, a stronger interest from students and faculty. 2 added new modalities for classes, HyFlex and online synchronous, which I know goes by multiple names. And then 1 institution saw students wanting to return to campus, but with the hybrid option, so not having to be on campus full time. There was a variety of ways that the pandemic impacted enrollment. Many of our institutions reported an overall decrease in enrollment, but an increase in the online enrollment for courses and programs. So 6 of the 9 institutions reported an increase in online enrollment. 2 reported kind of mixed results. It varied by the course or the program. And then 1 institution reported that there was no significant change in their enrollment at all. Something we were really interested in are the new initiatives that have been put in place since going through the pandemic, and what support for online enrollment growth looks like moving forward. So many institutions reported multiple initiatives to support online enrollment growth. Classroom technology upgrades to support hybrid options as we start to return to campus was one of the top things that many schools talked about. Creating Zoom rooms, expanding faculty training, and focused marketing efforts to promote online options. So here we asked each institution to share with us, what course formats they were offering. So these are the different answers. The numbers don't add up because you could select multiples. So you'll see fully online, synchronous, asynchronous. We've got hybrid flexible, HyFlex. So all sorts of things. The only thing we didn't see locally was on-demand learning. So that'll be interesting to see how that looks moving forward. We looked at the opportunity for using or considering use of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality in courses. And there were a few institutions that are rolling these initiatives out, and that might increase and or decrease now as schools come out of the pandemic. So nationally, technology was a very big place that money was spent. So we kind of saw a lot of that locally. So new technologies that institutions are looking for or to purchase in the next 3 years, accessibility was at the top of that list. Things like Blackboard Ally and Universal Design, those really came to the forefront during the pandemic. 2 institutions were discussing expanded classroom technology specifically for HyFlex opportunities, open educational resources, and tools that integrate into the learning management system. We talked about the virtual, augmented, and mixed reality there. Professional development, enhanced student services, and then freeware or cheap software. So those are all the things that we are looking to see integrated into these programs in the next few years.
And what was not captured on this was a robot version of Patrick. So that was on there, but we just took that out for results.
So the online learning changes and the impact that it's had on our students and on our faculty. So we've been able to provide many course delivery and modality options that maybe had never been considered pre-COVID. We've had increased mobile support, a larger focus on course quality, continuous improvement, and accountability, improved faculty, online teaching practices, and student-centric design. improved universal design for learning and accessibility, improved retention and completion rates, which I know is something that Macomb has been specifically looking at pre-pandemic for online courses, increased student support services, and then better tracking and reporting within our learning management systems.
All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the LMSs here. So we asked all the institutions what learning management system they're using, LMS or learning management system. So we can see 3 of them are using Blackboard or different versions of Blackboard right there. 3 using Canvas, 1 using D2L, and 2 of them using Moodle. So we asked a few different questions about the LMS, such as how long have you had it? So we didn't identify the different institutions. You just see there's a few different versions of like Canvas and Blackboard. This matches the numbers on this previous slide here. So that just shows for the different Canvas institutions, this is how long they've been using it. The longest one we have is 20 years with Blackboard. That's they win an award. We don't know who they are, so they win an award for that. And our institution has been 11 years with Moodle. I can see right here. So there's a pretty good breakdown of that. But what I thought was the most interesting was when we ask this, are you considering changing to a new LMS? So I don't think we've ever gotten in the past 100% no that we're not changing to a new LMS. Louise and I talked a little bit about this before as we're sort of looking at this data. And I think part of this is just because of the timing of what's going on here. We are during a pandemic, and as you might expect, it's not the best time to be changing technologies, especially something as large as the LMS, during a pandemic and having folks learn a whole new system with it. So my guess is that while maybe a lot of people are happy with their current LMS, the reason we're seeing 100% no on this right now is that this is just not the time to be changing. We even talked a little bit about, there was a couple of colleagues that we had known that right at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, they were already sort of in the middle of starting to transition their LMS when the pandemic happened and really couldn't back out at that point in time. And so we're in a very interesting situation. So I know I can speak for myself saying that I wouldn't want to consider or throw it on the faculty and staff using this to try to change it during the pandemic times. We always ask a little bit, because this is always interesting to me, of what just sort of the name is of their online learning department is. So you can see for the 9 that we have here, none of them were exactly the same. And this is sort of in alphabetical order, not the order of what we thought was the coolest, but a few of them still say e-learning, some say online or distance learning, digital, online campus. Some of them might be a little tied into some of their teaching and learning centers or some of their continuing education centers. So it's sort of interesting to see how these are sort of grouped and made up like that. We looked a little bit when we were talking about their own departments, about the full-time staff or full-time employees that they had. So you can see here, there's a somewhat even range for the most part, but there is some of those outliers, like one of them had 25 and one of them looked like it had 4 here. But for the most part, it was kind of around 10 or a little under 10, between 5 to 10. So you can see these are for the most part smaller online learning departments, I would say. I know I've made the case to my boss many times that we need roughly 25 people, which whatever lucky school that is has that, to support all the things that we're doing here with online learning at OU. But this is always interesting to me to see, just to maybe gripe about. And so maybe this is something you can use to take back to your institution to say, well, you know, we don't know which exactly one it is, but these are all Michigan institutions and some of them have a lot more staff than we do. So maybe we need to kind of catch up with the times. So maybe that can help you make that case for it. And I'm sure maybe during the discussion, some of the ones that if they're here and are lucky enough to have a lot of employees, they can talk a little bit about it. But that's one of the nice things about being a member of the A4EOE is that you can reach out to some of the other member institutions and just talk a little bit about that. And I've really found it helpful in the past to say, you know, help me make a case for certain things that I want to make throughout. When we're looking at pandemic staff changes, there was an interesting look, you know, of course, we have 9 different institutions that answered this. 6 of them said they didn't hire any staff, or even a few of them had lost staff. The 3 that did hire, and this is not in any, we just sort of had the different positions, so it's not for any one specific institution, but one of them was hiring an associate dean, a full-time ID or instructional designer, a part-time marketing compliance person, and part-time online support tech staff. And so we asked them, what currently is it, and then what plans do you have for future hiring? 4 institutions don't have any current plans for this, and there may be a lot of varying reasons for this. I know in OU, it's kind of a tight time right now. We have a drop in enrollment. We're not looking at how we can expand everything, but we're looking at what we can kind of cut with things. So it's a tricky time for institutions right now. So that might be a big part of why 4 institutions are not have any plans, because they just might say it's kind of futile at this point. But the 5 that did, we're looking at mainly the 2 things that we saw are like instructional designers. 4 of them were interested in that or said something along those lines. And then 2 of them were interested in any some sort of support staff or development staff. It could have been like a program or something like that with it. So very similar areas of what they're looking to do. And you can see a lot of that might be because of the pandemic, how they're looking to support what's going on with it. So for some of the final things we asked here, and I always like to share these, and again, it's always interesting for me to look at some of the different technologies we're using, especially during the pandemic when these are getting a lot more use. So virtual conferencing, we're on Zoom right now, and we had the 6 institutions out of the 9 were using Zoom itself. So it's a very popular tool. 6 of them, these numbers again don't add up because 6 of them are using more than one tool. I know at OU, I think we have 15 of them. So we do have Zoom. We actually are the ones at the bottom using Yuja. If you haven't heard of Yuja before, it's basically a media streaming service, and we got that to plug into Moodle, but it also has lecture capture and video conferencing built into it. So it's kind of a lot of different things that it does. We had an RFP right before the pandemic started, and it was overwhelming. People loved Yuja. When the pandemic hit, people hated it and wanted Zoom since everyone else was using it. So we ended up getting Zoom along with Google Meet that we have as well. So we have a few interesting ones that we support. So we see 6 are using Zoom, 3 using Microsoft Teams, 2 using Blackboard Collaborate, a couple using Google Meet, and then 1 with WebEx and 1 with Yuja. Again, there's some of these, 6 of them out of the 9 will have more than 1 tool. I know for OU, Google Meet, since we have Google Gmail is our Oakland email client, that's just built right into it. So we have that just sort of automatically. And we do that, we actually use it quite a bit for different things. It doesn't record because we have a free version of it. And so if we're just doing a quick little jump in meeting, oftentimes we'll do Meet instead of Zoom. So lecture capture is a very big thing that's going on right now. It's been big in the past, but so much more right now with the pandemic. For students who can't be there, they might want to record the lecture. And of course, we're seeing a lot more of that, as Louisa was talking about earlier, those different types of high flex classrooms. Or it might be you're there in the classroom with some students, but then other ones are online, sometimes using lecture capture to just record it so they can play it later. Or sometimes they have a program like this, like Zoom, where they can participate live online. So 2 of the institutions are not currently using lecture capture. 3 of them are using Panopto, 1 with Kaltura, 1 with Yuja, and 1 with VidGrid. So, and I've heard of all these. Panopto's kind of and Kaltura, they're kind of the most popular ones I've heard of in the past myself. Another big thing that we're looking at, especially when we're looking at accessibility and things like that, are providing captions and transcripts for video. As Patrick said, our last micro seminar was looking exactly at this. It's a really big thing. It's always been important. I think it's becoming a lot easier now with the technologies, and just really, I think awareness is being raised a lot more now, which is good. So we had 1 institution that did not currently have a solution in place for what they're doing for captioning transcript. And you'll see at the bottom of this list, 1 was just doing it in-house. And that could be a good or bad thing. You don't really know a lot more unless they say more about it. And what I mean by that is that there's some institutions I've heard of, this is nationally now, that have a pretty big team. It might be student employees, things like that, that are going through and reviewing these videos and captioning them, and making transcript. We did not have that luck at Oakland University, and maybe even this institution might not have that luck. They might only have a small staff that's doing it and might only be able to do a small amount, for example. But so 3 of them were using Panopto, and I'm guessing with that, Panopto has a built-in captioning function. So it's almost like that. You might have seen it in YouTube, and some of them have the automatic function. Some of these are actually getting pretty decent, but it still depends a whole lot on things like accents, colloquialisms and things you're using, some of the special language, how slow you're talking, if you're really enunciating very well, or if you're kind of really talking like this and going on, it's going to make a big difference in how those auto captioning will work. So we have some other ones, Replay Media, Rev, MS Stream, VidGrid. So just kind of an interesting breakdown with that. And the final thing I'll briefly talk about before we'll start to open this up to the group and start to talk, kind of get your opinion and discuss more of the data here, is the OPMs, the online program managements. I'm a little biased, maybe against OPMs, but I won't try to color anyone's opinion on this. But I'm always interested in it, how other folks are doing with OPMs or thinking about it. So we asked them, are you using an online program management company, or are you considering it? And you can see along the right those different options that we had there. So of the 9, 8 of them were not using it, had no plans of using it. And only one of them was using it, but it's that bottom option of using it for marketing of their online programs, OL or online programs only. So I thought that was kind of interesting to look at. Again, we can have a whole discussion about OPMs and what we think the value or the harm of them is. And maybe we will during this part right now. We kind of let you all discuss on that. But I'm going to turn it back over to Louisa, and we'll both kind of jump in here and there to start a little bit of this discussion. So I'm not going to keep this slide up here because it just says your current challenges right now. And we can see each other a little better if I turn this off. So before I turn it over to Louisa fully, if you want to, you can turn your video back on. And as we start this, you can feel free to type text chat in there, but you can also just turn your microphone on and talk throughout.
All right. Oh, we just got one question in the chat, so we'll start with that. Is there any data on the number of faculty who now include online or hybrid classes as a result of having to teach online during COVID?
So let's see here. I mean, in our specific survey, there was not. But that'd be interesting to look at. One of the things I think is very interesting when we're looking at even these new class types. I know you're asking about online and hybrid, but I'm even thinking of high flex is that there are things that we don't, and even kind of hybrid with that, there's things that we don't as institutions have to report back to iPED's data. And this is a lot of the data. If anyone's using programs like MC or Burning Glass, which are now one program now, or any of these market research tools, or even just going out to iPED's data, which is the public data, you can see that institutions report back to see what are the different programs they have, what are their graduation rates, things like that. They really only have to report back on if it's a fully online or face-to-face program, certificates and minors and things aren't in there. So some of that data is hard to get unless we're specifically asking for it, which we didn't in our survey. But it's kind of a good question to think about. I don't know if you have a different comments you want to mention specifically about that or your question.
I just wanted to know if there's an uptake in the number of faculty who prior to COVID refused to teach online, but now because of that experience are interested in getting training and adapting to the technologies that are now available. So that would be an interesting collection of data if we can do that at some point in the future. It's my from a student standpoint, and you can confirm this or not, it's my understanding the student experience has driven them to actually take more classes than they otherwise would prior to the COVID, because of the option to do either online or hybrid, that the number of credit hours has increased per student. So I don't know if that's the case at OU or other places, but that seems to be the trend. But I guess that data needs to be confirmed.
Ed, that would make sense. It kind of aligns with what Louisa was saying about the improved retention in online, right? So that might drive up then the average credit load that students are able to be successful in because they are mixing modalities potentially, even if they are an on-ground student. I was wondering, I think that is an excellent point about kind of how the perception has changed for faculty who prior to the pandemic might have been a little bit more hesitant, I will say, to jump into the online world. I think that also makes a challenge. I know one thing that we have noticed at Baker is the pandemic has helped our faculty and students become so flexible and adaptable that now that we have transitioned back to a less reactive mode, we're finding that faculty are still wanting to maybe Zoom students in, or we had an incident where perhaps a faculty was wondering, can I Zoom myself in because I don't feel well? And we're struggling in having the conversations with, well, what does that do to the delivery mode definitions that we have with our accrediting bodies that the DOE has? Because a lot of times those iPads would be they lag, right? They lag and so can an instructor Zoom themselves into a face-to-face classroom? Does that count as meaning the seat time for that on ground class, right? Great that they're being flexible and adaptable and trying to meet the needs of student learning, but it's a challenge too. And we don't quite know, right? We're trying to help. No, we're not reactive. Let's get back to our defined delivery modes and our regular practice for making up class if we have to cancel. So I think it's both good, but now we have a challenge because people have become adaptable and flexible and reactive to the situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will say for our survey, we did say where we did have of the 9 institutions, 6 of them reported in some way we were asking about this impact, that their faculty students just had were more receptive to it all around. But we do actually have some faculty members here. So if you want to sort of say your opinion, or if you know your colleague's opinion, we'd love to hear from you about, since this pandemic has happened, has that changed your outlook overall, maybe made you more or less susceptible to teaching online? Or if you can talk a little about maybe some of your colleagues' experiences.
Oh, I'll take a shot at that.
Okay.
I was skeptical. We at Walsh, we always did a lot of remote work, and we have a robust and fabulous online learning staff to support us. So that was a huge help in the transition. And, of course, we only got sent home for 2 weeks that turned into 2 years. And I'm such a fan of teaching from, you're here with me in my dining room. I teach from my dining room. My students love it. I love it. And we've had, I think the pandemic itself gave us, I think, permission to be more with our students, to say, particularly in the early months, to say, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? Are you coping okay? What's going on? And I think it made people more open to that. And as it's gone along, I think that's been fostered. I mean, there's things that can happen for the classroom dynamic in a Zoom room that would never happen in a classroom. One student said, "I'm sorry, professor, I can't put my camera on because my wife's late and I have to hold our baby." I'm like, "We want to see your baby." So, brand new proud father. I mean, it was a lovely moment for the whole class. That's not going to happen in a classroom. I think they love the convenience. When I talk to them about it, which I do at least a couple times this semester, they love it. They love the convenience. They love to be able to click out of their Zoom and be home already and have dinner or tuck the kid in, or Zoom from their office and not have to commute. They do express an interest in coming back to campus, but I think our experience, and Drew, tell me I think I'm right about this. What I hear from the facilities folks is, we schedule hybrid classes to accommodate both Zoom and in-person classes in our very lovely Zoom-enabled hybrid classrooms. And students show up the first couple of weeks, and after a while, it's like, nah, this isn't so special, actually. Being back at campus isn't that cool. I'll Zoom, thanks. I don't know what, I think as we get more and more post-pandemic, perhaps they will feel better about coming to class. I think it's nostalgia for the good old days that don't exist anymore, that wanting to go back to campus.
Yeah, Professor August, I'd like to add, I think you're spot on. I find that because of COVID, I think faculty members are much more in tune to the needs of the students. And I think that maybe to a fault, some faculty have gone too far with that, because I think some students take advantage of that, but not many. But overall, I think there's a much more connection between the needs of the students and having them become successful versus having a hands-off approach prior to COVID. That's what I sense is going on with a lot of interaction between faculty and students.
Yeah, hopefully a lot more empathy going on.
Yeah, a lot more
empathy. I'm gonna call on Nancy because she's had her hand up so patiently.
Oh, it's fine. I'm at home, and I've only talked to a few faculty in my department in English, and many English faculty are extroverted to an nth degree, and they can't wait to get back on campus. But what's also driving them is we're seeing the disaffected students, the unengaged students. We're starting to see that phenomenon roll through our classes right now. And those who have not taught online for a while are really coming up against that wall of, I want to look them in the face. I want to be in the room with them. I've taught online for 25 years now. So for me, online is the way to go. But for them, there's not that comfort level. They need to look their students in the eye because they don't know what to do with the disengaged students.
Hi, I'll jump in. I'm Dawn Edford. I teach biology at Oakland Community College. And I can offer a different perspective too, because as a science class during the pandemic, we had to do lecture and lab online. I've been back in the classroom this past academic year. Half of my load is face-to-face. The other half is a hybrid where lecture is online and lab is back at the classroom. In terms of online learning, I find laboratory to be a subpar experience, at least in the quick way we had to adapt. I guess I won't dismiss all online lab activities, but I teach anatomy. And part of that is you've got the group effort, you've got the tactile aspect of the lab to help with their learning as well. But what I am finding with the hybrid class is they're having a difficult time balancing time to study for lecture and time to study for lab. And they don't want to do both at the same time. So I'm even questioning whether or not to keep offering that anatomy class as a hybrid. I did poll my students and I did do evaluations, and I look forward to reading them in about 2 weeks when the semester is over.
Dawn, how much control do you have over that? Or is that your department chair is going to have to make that call? Is that up to you or not?
If I teach a hybrid?
Yeah.
Oh, it's up to me.
It is, okay.
Yep. Yeah. Most people in our discipline, we have a few people offering a fully online science classes with labs right now that most of us are back on campus. And we're keeping the lines of communication open, and we want to hear about those experiences. But right now we have as faculty, we have the flexibility to offer face-to-face, hybrid, and fully online.
Oh, well, great. Thank you.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned kind of the labs there, Dawn. I was on what they called the virtual labs committee throughout the pandemic, which was just a very, very tricky committee that we tried to solve these problems of, especially at the point where there was absolutely no on-ground face-to-face component, where it was just gone and you couldn't do it. And we looked to do things like these very tricky labs online. And even as the director of online learning, I'll be the first to say that not everything should and could be online and even works online, right? You can't dissect something online. I mean, you can make cases, right? We have even some nice applications, even virtual reality, where you can do some cool things, but it's still not you there, you're touching something, you know, there's a realistic factor to it. So I think there's a lot we've come. I think there's still ways we have to go until we're all, plugged into the back of our heads, and then we don't have to worry about living our regular lives anymore, which I'm looking forward to. But that was a very tricky thing with the labs there.
I would agree. And I was thankful that we had figured out an online lab option for AMP. I don't know, it was many years ago now, but they actually do get the box with the sheep's heart and all of the things, right? But for our other labs, same thing, biochemistry and all those other ones that were the more advanced sciences in particular, it was really challenging. And I think just like every institution at some point, we were kind of we're going to have to do the best we can, but then how do we then recover from learning loss, right? So we all did the very best we could to continue to progress students, and we were given a lot of flexibility, again, from various agencies to do so. But in some of those specialized courses that had to pivot so quickly and relied on the in-person work, right? You know, I think healthcare and like sonography labs and with the equipment and those sort of things, there's only so much you can do. So then there's learning loss. And I think a lot of our faculty and program directors, again, being super adaptable and responsive to student needs, I try to remember that they're in a place now where they're trying to help those students kind of maybe make up if there was any loss during that time and keep them on track to graduate when they're supposed to. So I think our faculty are doing a lot of extra effort and double duty. And I think, so we talked about empathy for the students. I think we all have a lot of empathy for the faculty as well, because they're doing even more than they ever did to make sure that those students are successful.
Joanne, this is Patrick. Just quick, how do they determine learning loss? Are you actually gauging that? And if so, how is that actually quantified?
I think it's a great question, and no, we're not quantifying it. But I think it makes me want to go back to some of the deans to ask: are they having some of those conversations in their more departmental groups?
Right.
I think faculty, as a general rule, will tend to help fill in gaps where they see it. But I feel like we're probably seeing that a little bit more. Like to Don's point, like if they took AMP 1 in this format and then they get next fall go into AMP 2 back, right? What are we seeing as far as maybe needing extra help? I do think Lynn brought up a good point in the comments too that kind of relates to this. She talked about it's not just faculty, but that like advising and our tutoring and all of that have pivoted as well. And I would agree. We found that the students didn't realize we had a virtual ARC or academic resource center and tutoring in math and writing, but then they kind of had to use it during the pandemic. And now we're having a hard time. We haven't been able to open our on-campus ones because they weren't getting enough traffic to staff them, because the students are telling us by what they're choosing that they really love to be able to log on to the virtual tutoring center and say, oh my gosh, look, there's a math tutor available at 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to do that because that's when I'm doing my math homework. So I think, student services for sure has pivoted greatly to more virtual delivery options too.
Great. Well, we're actually reaching our 45-minute post here, and I just want to make sure that we're being sensitive to everybody's time here. Any additional feedback or any other comments from any of our participants here?
Yeah, I do have one. I do have one
ahead.
question, and that is the offering of classes. Has that changed? Have the colleges that you are employed by, have they taken a proactive route or a reactive route to how students want to take classes? Some colleges have a separate listing of online classes or hybrid classes. So I guess that's one method. Others do not. They just blend them together. And so.
Well, I'll say for OU, it's certainly changed and grown a lot. We've seen an overwhelming number of students wanting more online options, even if it's not a full program, right? Some more online classes here or there. And faculty now saying, you know what, I can do this. I may not love it the best, right? But I can do it. I've been doing it the past few years. So at OU, we've certainly seen a giant change and more flexible options offered.
So OU adds additional sections as classes fill up in terms of online offerings?
But we've done that in the past as well, right? If there's enough need for it, we've done it in the past. I'm mainly more talking about in terms of like just the different flexibility options we've offered. And might not have offered like an online or hybrid version before where we are now, or even creating a high flex class code that we're doing this spring.
Yeah, right.
I would say Baker does the same, and we're actually tracking the numbers though. I don't know if it gets to kind of what you were saying too, is that, so if we offer comm or intro comm class, we're offering it on face-to-face on campus, online synchronous and online asynchronous. Because we promise students that that's how we're going to offer it. Our challenge is going to be, we're waiting to see if the on-ground sections get more. Like we could have, on one campus, there could be 6 on ground, and another one might have 5 or 8 or 10. And then what we see in online synchronous is 87, and online asynchronous has 182. And so we're tracking it. We're still trying to offer all to the students. And then how do we use that data for future scheduling purposes? Because I don't know yet. I don't know how many of the students yet are going to return. Kind of to Louisa's point, what's the value proposition that face-to-face on campus class might offer to students now if they're comfortable in getting what they need from an online synchronous, especially, is probably the biggest competitor with those face-to-face on campus classes now. Too early to tell.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
agree.
We're doing something similar at Macomb. So we put out a 50-50 schedule for the first time. So 50% of our offerings are on campus, and we're tracking, where students are registering and allowing them to really vote with the way that they're registering. So if we start to see the virtual wait lists go up, that's where we're going to add sections. If we see that remote wait list go up, that's what we're going to add. And we even have classes, kind of back to Joanna's point, we have students that will come to the library for their remote course because they have an on-ground course immediately after. So that increase in the credit hours, that gives them, more options than they had before. So we have a lot of students doing that, which was really interesting and something I hadn't even, considered that students might do. But a lot of our health programs have been on campus since 2020 and can only be on campus. So they've been able to add to their schedules with these flexible options.
All right, well, great. Again, thanks to everybody for participating in this dialogue, and certainly to Sean and to Louisa for doing the great work regarding the survey. It's really interesting to see the survey results year over year, and as things evolve, it's great to know what's happening locally as well as nationally. So I thought today's topic was right on. I do want to let you know that we are attempting, hopefully in the fall, to have an face-to-face symposium, and the date we've selected is October 21st. And we're going to have it at Oakland University. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we can actually do that. If you have anybody that wants to join formally the Alliance, feel free to reach out to me or anybody you see here in these windows. We'd love to have you participate. As this dialogue has proven, it's really great to be able to connect quickly with our colleagues and be able to find out what's happening in the world of online. I do want to thank Tanya with your comments. I appreciate that. And Lori, your participation has been great. I thank you for that. And Dawn and Nancy and really everybody here. Thank you for your participation in this. So anything else we need to close the meeting? Sean, anything?
No, we just unfortunately cannot do our disco dance off. We're out of time, but next time around.
Yeah, we're out of time.
I apologize.
I've got rhythm.
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in the fall, okay? Take care.